On this video, I'm giving my review of Pendulum from Stonemaier Games, one of the most divisive titles of 2020. But why is it so? The clock is ticking, let's get started. Hi everyone and welcome to another Broken Meeple video. My name's Luke Hector, and if you're new to the channel, please stick around to find out more about upcoming games, older games, and the people who play them. Pendulum is the next big release from Stonemaier Games, and now whenever they release a game, it tends to get a fair bit of hype. However, this one has been a bit more divisive amongst people. There's a good equal amount that love it, and a good equal amount that don't. So this was a bit more of an interesting one to get, and I had to really dive in to see what was what. In this game, you are all nobles trying to succeed the timeless king and be ruler of the land. And that's about as far as I'm going to go into the theme, and you'll find out why later on. But the idea with this game is that it works with a real-time mechanism. Players will have a board with different tracks that they've got to level up throughout the game. Blue, yellow and red, and a single grey one. The idea is that you have timers on different action spaces on the board, and it works as a worker placement game. Players will use their workers to go to different spaces to level up their tracks, gain resource cubes, and use them to perform certain actions either with cards or on the board itself. The timer aspect though is that you are restricted not only by where other players are with the workers, but also on where the timer is. 3 timers, all operating at different lengths, but you're not allowed to place any workers on a row where there is a timer. But you're not allowed to perform any actions unless there's a timer there. So as the game is going throughout its phases in the round, you are trying to keep an eye on what workers you're using, where they can go, what actions they can do, all the while keeping an eye on the timers as players keep flipping them at different times, trying to see, right, I can go here, I can't go there, what do I do? And all the while it's about collecting cubes, scoring points by leveling up the various tracks, until eventually the purple timer, the longest one, flips for the final time in the round, and then there's a little bit of a setup phase for the next round, and play continues for another 3 rounds after that. In between each round, players have the opportunity to purchase certain cards which they can add to their hand of cards that they start the game with in order to perform certain actions that don't require the timers to perform. On top of that, you are able to play this without the timers if you so wish by using an untimed variant that is good for a teaching tool, or if you're just not a big fan of real-time games, you can use it to play the entire game. And if you really don't like playing with other players, there's also a solo variant which we'll get onto in more detail later. After 4 rounds of timer flippery, you are totaling up your points, and the idea is that your tracks that you've been leveling up must reach a certain point on your board, and then for every point they go beyond that, you end up with victory points. And of course, who has the most? What do you think?
Of course!
Feels so good to have that back. So we need to get into some serious detail, and for this I'm starting with D for duration. How long's the game? We're talking 60 to 90 minutes on average, and to be honest, you're kind of forced into that because the game has to take a minimum length of time anyway because of the timers. The round time length is dictated by one specific 3-minute timer flipping over several times, so you can't end the round any sooner than that. And if you decide to do a untimed phase, then the round may take shorter or longer time depending on the analysis paralysis of the players. Not that there's a lot of options you've got to consider in general because you are quite restricted on where you can go, but if you are going to do 4 timed phases as well as the purchase of cards in between, you are looking at about a 60-minute game, 90 minutes if you're going to include teaching and setup. So all in all, compared to a lot of Euros, it's not that long to do, and that's probably a good thing in this case. For ease of play, this is not going to be a good one for many. For starters, it's a real-time game, and this is going to put off a lot of people. Yes, you can play it with the untimed phase, but we'll get onto that a bit more later. But let's say you must do the time phases. Well then, you need to be used to real-time, and all what comes with real-time games comes with this one as well. The book actually makes a big deal about, oh, it doesn't matter if you're the fastest or the quickest off the mark. That is baloney. I'm sorry, you are playing a real-time competitive game. Whoever is quicker will do better, end of story. It's not like you can be as slow as a turtle and still win the game. It's not going to happen. So if real-time games are too tense for you, or too annoying, or too much of a fiddly aspect, you're not going to get into this game. But the time phase is one that you will have to get used to if you're going to play it, because it is the better way to play the game. Unfortunately, the rulebook doesn't do the best of jobs in helping you along this path. It's not that the rulebook is particularly poorly laid out, but I just found some of the wording very ambiguous at times, and I found myself referring back to it quite often because you've really got to have ingrained in your head how the action selection works and where you can put your workers and where you can't. If you don't have that ingrained in your skull, then you're going to make a mistake and it's going to break the game balance. But even then, there was a lot of times when I was looking at the rulebook trying to think, oh, so hang on a minute, so does that timer flip onto the first space when we start a round, or do I turn it on its head? And okay, so we're pushing this card, so what did that symbol mean? There's a lot of referring back to the book, and when you try to find your answer, it's not easy to find it, particularly when it comes to looking at some of the iconography. Some of it I'm scrolling through the rulebook like crazy trying to find out where it is. I just found it more fiddly than it really needed to be. Now, the book does say that you can use an untimed phase, which basically means that everybody does their actions and then you flip certain timers and ignore the sand in the timers. So you essentially just go through the rounds in turn sequence, almost, well, not in turn sequence, more simultaneously, but you wait until everybody's finished all their actions, then you flip it, and then you all go again. So this is a nice way to teach the game, and I do recommend, especially for your first game, that you do this for the first round. The rulebook does allow you to mix and match which ones you want to do it for. You could play the entire game untimed, the entire game timed, do one round untimed and 3 timed. You can pretty much tailor it to your heart's content. But I do recommend that you do an untimed phase just to teach the mechanics of the game, because I think if you dive straight into this with the timer phases, that first round you aren't going to have the foggiest clue what it is you're trying to do, and everybody's going to be making mistakes, because there's the other problem. This is a real-time game. You are focused on what you do. The only reason you even care that the other opponents are there is because they're blocking your spaces. So you have to hope and trust that they got the rules right, because you aren't going to be able to be the rules lawyer for them. They haven't got time to ask you how this particular thing works, so they could be making rules mistakes everywhere, and let's face it, the rulebook's probably going to guarantee somebody's going to make a mistake somewhere, and you don't know it's happened, so you just have to kind of accept that they are in what position they are in, because, well, how else are they going to do it? For tactics and strategy, for the most part, this is a fairly bog standard Euro. If you were to remove the timed phase entirely, you'd have a pretty boring Euro. Just go to some spaces with a few restrictions, level up a few tracks, get a few cubes, convert cubes to, level up the track even more. It's not exactly particularly exciting, nor, thought-provoking. But where this game comes into its own in a good way is the time phase, as much as it is a bit of a gimmick, and to be fair, I give respect to the designer for trying a Euro game with timers. I mean, that took some guts. But the time phase is actually the best part about this. You have got quite an amount of restrictions as to where you can put your workers. You can't have too many workers on the space if they're just common workers, but the grande worker can get past. But then the timers, 3 minutes, 45 seconds and 1.5 minutes, I believe, and they flip at different times, but they will only flip if the sands run out and a player decides to flip it. And so you're looking at all the different spaces thinking, right, well, I need this, I need this, I need that, but hang on, my worker can't do anything there because I need the timer to flip. How much sand is in it? Still a fair bit. What can I do here? Oh, black's going to flip. Right, flip that myself. Right, now I can do these actions. I'll grab a province, and with the provinces, you can slide them onto your board and trigger multiple effects. Kind of a bit like the card effects in Deus and a couple of other games where the more cards you have underneath a particular action, and when you trigger it, you get to do all the stuff. It's pretty straightforward and abstract, but it's another element to the game that you can tailor for a different, shall we say, sort of path to victory. But it's really about the idea of trying to maneuver your workers and deal with those timers. And it does create a decent amount of tension as you're going through the time phases. The untimed phase, in contrast, however, is pretty dull. It pretty much is a case of going, well, I'll go one worker there, one worker there. Everyone done? Yeah, good. I'll level up this track and I'll get a few points there or something. It's not particularly exciting at all. But on top of that, you may have turns, particularly in lower player counts, where you are basically just staring at timers and waiting for them to finish. That's not particularly fun when that happens, although that problem is alleviated a bit more in higher player counts because you have more people going over the board and trying to flip timers, and you're actually more concerned about where the other players are going rather than whether the timers run out. There's not a great deal of variety though in terms of the path to victory, however. You have got 4 different columns for provinces. They're just different colours, and the provinces that you add to them will get you one of 3 different types of resource cubes, and that's about it. They don't really do any other cool funky effects. You've got these vote tokens that you can grab, but literally the only purpose they serve, apart from a few cards that you can pay the cost for, is just to see whether you are highest in a privilege marker, which basically means when we get to the council phase, which is where you buy more cards, you get to go first. That's pretty much all it does. And what are these cards? Well, you start with 4 in your hand, and they're pretty basic. You know, 1 will level you up a track, 1 allows you to get more workers, 1 lets you do some funky action on the board. And the cards that you can buy 1 card, and, well, you don't even buy it, you basically just take 1 card from a selection, a tableau, and you just simply add it to your hand and you can use it for the rest of the game. There's a few bits of repetition with these cards, but the cards are a neat little addition, and I like the fact that I can decide to go, oh, that card fits into what I'm trying to do this game lots. Like, I'm really focused on trying to get a bunch of yellow cubes, and so this one helps me do that. Well, I'll take this card then, and then maybe next round I can do a bit more. But like I say, I'm struggling to make the Euro mechanic sound fun, because the Euro part of this game isn't particularly fun. It's really the timer phase that's the whole point of Pendulum. And if you don't like that aspect and you take it out, you kind of remove the unique selling point of Pendulum. And now we move on to A for aesthetics, and yeah, we're going downhill at this point, guys, because this is the board cover for Pendulum. This is the best looking thing in the game, hands down. Do you like that cover? Does that cover look good? Nice. I would have picked this off the shelf if I saw it with that cover. Great. The rest of this game, however, ugh. It is full of mostly very bland looking covers and artwork and lots of dark muted colours. I mean, the player boards aren't too bad, but they just look bland. They don't look particularly inspiring. You get a half decent picture of a character, but then the rest of it is just the provinces at the bottom, free spaces for cubes, and the tracks at the top. You know, the player boards are half decent, but they're these, you know, flimsy linen covered board. I know Stonemar's got a thing with linen covering everything now, but it's still a fairly flimsy set of boards. And even then, the main board is pretty bland in itself. I mean, let's face it, you're walking past the table. Let's assume you don't see the timers, because the timers will turn everybody's head. But let's say you saw this board when you were going past. Would you take even a second glance at this board? You would just walk right on past, wouldn't you? There's nothing on this board to make it inspiring. The main benefit though is that because it's, you know, fairly big icons and fairly big spaces, that you'll be able to see it no matter where you are, and at least the graphic design is clear enough, providing you know what the iconography does, that you'll be able to see what the action does and you're not squinting or trying to find it. So there are some benefits to it, but it just really is pretty uninspired. Even the components itself, you've got these little plasticky vote purple squares, all the resources are just tiny little cubes, the province cards are just, you know, the card stock just feels very thin and flimsy. The whole affair just feels cheap. And the timers, oh my god, don't get me started on these wretched things, because timers are a major problem child with a lot of real-time games. Now they look nice, okay? They look funky, fair enough, but there are 2 big design flaws. Firstly, the green one particularly, and this is not just me, other people have had this, the green one has a habit of sticking with the sand. You have to kind of check it every now and again to make certain it is actually flowing. It is now, but there's quite a few times in games where I have noticed it's got stuck and you've got to double check it's moving. The other annoyance is that for some bizarre reason, the publisher here decided to make the tops of these a kind of rounded bevel shape. So rather than making them totally flat so that the timer easily stands up, they've got basically like almost like a diamond jewel. You know how they look, where they've got the slanted bit at the top of different segments? It looks exactly like that. You won't be able to see it on camera though while I'm trying, but it means that this tiny little bit there, like literally smaller than the top half of my finger, is the flat bit. So you're trying to stand this timer up and keep it steady on the board while everybody is clawing around going, worker, 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 here, there, cubes, 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 card, card, card. And you think the timer's never going to get knocked over? Good luck with that. So now we move on to I for Immersion. Is the theme engaging enough that it will keep you engaged? What theme? Seriously, I can't even finish the sentence. What theme. The Timeless King has died or he's abdicated. I have no idea. The story is so bland, it's not even worth reading. The rulebook barely goes into that much detail anyway. But you are nobles succeeding this guy for reasons, and the clock is not ticking, so that's an excuse to have the timers. I don't know. It's like there's no thematic reason why the timers are in play. There's no thematic connection with each of your characters. I mean, one guy looks like a minotaur and the other one looks like a warlock, and it makes no difference. It just dictates the tracks. Oh look, I have the board with a long red track, you have the board with a long blue track, and mine are all level, and it's just like, what? No story, no theme. As I said, the Euro part of the game is pretty bare bones, bland, dry Euro mechanics. The only thing that brings up the engagement in the game is that timed phase, and that is easily my favourite part of Pendulum. I've got XCOM in the other room, I've played other timed games, I'm fine with real-time games. Magic Maze is another half-decent one. But with this one, if you take the timers out, it's just a very boring Euro game. I don't care about what player board I am, I don't care what the different colours are with the cubes, I'm just like, give me 2 yellow, give me a blue, give me a red, oh and now I'll just convert it into these purple ones. I thought we were past this. We should be making a bit more effort to inject theme into our games, and again, Scythe, Viticulture, Euphoria, Wingspan. I mean, they had great themes. Okay, not every single one of them was rock solid strong. You can argue that Wingspan is a bit abstracted, but it was a unique, appealing theme. What about this one, is, apart from the cover, is going to give you the idea, oh yeah, I like the theme in this. You're nobles and there's a random king. Come on, compared to birds and the alternate history in Scythe and making wine, which theme are you going to pick as more favourable? In fact, this one, the cover tricks you. There is a red dragon here. Look, there's a red dragon there around there. Dragons are cool. There's a big, like, almost like an old god, like face with a white beard and wings. He's a giant eagle thing. There's the Minotaur I spoke of. There's like some magic user, some random dude standing there. I'm not sure what his game is. And this awesome looking clock tower. None of this is represented in the game with any kind of thematic connection other than the fact you've got timers. So moving on to L for longevity. What's the player scaling like? Is it going to last? Is the solo mode any good? Here, the player scaling is not very good indeed. If you play this with 5 players, it is one of the most chaotic experiences I've ever played in a game. 5 people trying to get around this board, and bearing in mind, it's not the biggest board. So if you play this game on any table that is bigger than the board itself, players are going to struggle to reach the timers. You need to be able to reach those timers, and any large size table is not going to be able to handle it. And if you try and get 5 of you round the table, I mean, if you're trying to stick to COVID guidelines, this game is impossible to play with 5 players. But it's just like, it gets far too chaotic with the workers and everyone flipping timers. It's a mess. But then on the flip side, playing this solo or with 2 players is outright boring. Because the problem is that even though the timers don't flip like any more frequently in a sense, because they still run to their normal time lengths, with 3 and 4 players you've got more of an idea of being blocked out of spaces, and more players are there to flip the timers, so it's more kinetic, it's more fluid. With 2 players, it can sometimes end up in a position where you spend most of your time just doing 1, maybe 2 things, and then you're waiting for a timer. And in solo mode, oh my god, don't get me started on solo mode. The solo mode in this is completely pointless. It is just a waiting game. You might as well play it untimed, although I don't think you can. I think you have to play it timed. I forget, but it's just boring. I mean, as I said, the theme is not immersive, so I don't feel like I'm doing anything particularly interesting. But with only 1 of you and the 3-minute and a minute and a half and 45-second timers, a lot of the times, particularly in the early game, you're just literally going to go duh, duh.
3 hours later.
Can you move it along? I'm all out of time cards.
Yeah, really, it's that much of a waiting game. You just sit there looking at timers. That's not particularly fun in a solo mode. It's a bit better with multiplayer when lots of people are clambering around and you've got to think fast, but here you've got all the time in the world to think because you're pretty much solely concerned with what you're doing and the neutral players are just there. And on top of that, it's fiddly to maneuver the solo mode because there are rules for flipping this card deck over as another automna as usual, and most of the time the automna is pretty good. Here though, pretty much like 90% of the time you do anything, you've got to flip one of these cards to dictate, oh hang on, which timer flips if that happens, right, fine. Oh, the worker needs to move from, I think it's on that timer row, so it's got to move that worker to that space to block that one. You've got to get this ingrained into your head in order to do this well, and I find that you spend more time having to deal with the automner than actually being able to think about what it is you're doing on your own turn. Really did not enjoy the solo mode in this. If you're hoping to grab this, a bit like when you grab Tapestry for solo mode only, don't grab Pendulum for solo mode only. This mainly sings as a 3 to 4 player game. 3 is definitely the sweet spot, I find. It's that decent balance of length versus interaction versus not waiting for the timers. But yeah, don't do this with 5 if you can help it, and certainly don't go near this for solo mode. And honestly, I would probably recommend not for 2 player either. 3 to 4, stick with that. And the replay value isn't that great either. You take a few of the blue stratagem cards out of the deck, you would not even be able to tell which ones they were, because the abilities are basically just icons and a few beige cards, and I hate the fact that I have to say the words beige euro in the same sentence as Stonemaier games, because that doesn't make sense, that does not compute. But on top of that, you use all the special red bonus cards in the middle of the table, and again, it's just simply a case of flip one over and say, oh, this round you can get a bonus if you get 3 purple tiles and 3 yellow cubes and 6 blue. Yay! The province cards, you use them all, but again, it's literally a name, which is pointless because there's no theme here, and 4 different icons that you can slot underneath your board to say, right, this column will be worth more. And they're pretty standard bonuses. It's just a case of, do you want some extra power, some extra culture, some extra votes, or some extra money? It's those 4 repeated pretty much all the time. Oh yeah, and there's one for victory point tracks as well, but again, there's nothing interesting about the different cards. It's just a case of, well, they're there. Which one do I fancy? I'll take that one and shove it under there. What does it matter? So my final word on Pendulum is that despite this 10 out of 10 score I will give it for innovation, and I will applaud Stonemaier and this designer for coming out with a game that is truly unique when we're surrounded by thousands of games that all feel the same, sadly, it's not enough to carry Pendulum on its own. The time phase is easily the best aspect of it, but unfortunately, when you take that out, it becomes just a bland Euro with some of the most blandest mechanics I've ever seen. On top of that, the aesthetics don't help, the immersion factor isn't there, it's really a case that the timer phase is where it's at, and then there's not much else for it. Yeah, it takes about 60 to 90 minutes and doesn't outstay its welcome. Yeah, it's not the most complicated game out there, but the rulebook doesn't help to make it a little bit too fiddly. But also being real time, it's not likely to be accessible to a lot of players who either don't like real time at all, or who don't mind real time, but then don't want the Euro game side on top of it. So my final verdict with this game, and I have to give it a bit of tough love, particularly when comparing it to a lot of Stonemaier's previous titles, I was deciding between 2, but I've got to go with a 4 out of 10 on my own scale, not BoardGameGeek's scale. BoardGameGeek considers 4 to be pretty bad. Me, 4 is below average. You know, 5 would be average, 4 is below average. There's some merits to this game, and occasionally I can be like, oh, I'm engaged and I'm doing this, but when that stuff is taken out, there's not a lot left. Not a lot of replay value, no theme, not particularly great aesthetics, a slightly fiddly rulebook, a solo mode that's not worth doing. There's far too many negatives to outweigh the positives I have for this game. You could get me to play it every now and again, perhaps, if it was on the table, but I would pretty much be wanting to play other games before I decide to choose this one. Now I hope you've enjoyed my slight descent into madness, but there are other content creators out there that deserve your support and your viewership as well. I always say that you should not just take my opinion on its own, you should check out as many content creators as you can, get all their opinions and make up your own mind. So for starters, check out this channel and see if they're right for you.
Hi everybody, my name is Sean Evans.
And I'm Tico.
And we are OMG Nexus. We are video gamers, we are board gamers, and we like to talk about all things geek on our weekly show, the OMG Hour. We have other shows called Flipping Tables, our board game review series, as well as Kicking Tables, in which we talk with board game developers. We would love for you to come check us out on youtube.com/OMG Nexus. Come and stop by. We'd appreciate it.
So that's all from me on this video. If you liked what you see and have earned your subscription, then please click the avatar in the center of the screen to subscribe and hit the bell for future notifications from YouTube. Alternatively, you can check out my most recent upload at the top or a suggested video by me at the bottom. For now, always remember, it's only a game. Take care.